Well, hello again there guys, Brian here at the 3TR channel, and I have another top 10s requested list for you to share with you guys today. Now this video was requested by one of my viewers going by the name of Omega98777, and he wanted me to share with you my top 10 favorite childhood video games, which I thought was a pretty interesting list because I guess certain games on this list may end up being in particular orders that some of you may find shocking. Now, I'm 24 right now, and therefore my gaming experience really started from 1995, and I can say my childhood really went from 1995 all the way to 2002. So I will only be counting games in that time frame. So without that further ado, starting off with number 10 on my list, I picked Metal Gear Solid 1. Now look, if you guys know me, you know how I feel about Metal Gear Solid. But back then, when Metal Gear Solid first came out back in '98, I knew it was important, but I didn't exactly understand why. I mean, it just seemed like a really fun concept of me sneaking around instead of just killing everything in sight. And me being an 8-year-old playing an M-rated game, I'm sure you can kind of understand I got pretty scared of that game, and I didn't even get a chance to finish that game. But I knew I would come back to it one day, and it wouldn't be till several years later when Metal Gear Solid 3 would come out that I would officially go back and play Metal Gear Solid 2 and 1, which would then lead it to becoming one of my all-time favorite Metal Gear Solid games of all time, if not becoming my all-time favorite video game franchise of all time, which is why Metal Gear Solid 1 is really low on my list. Going on into number 9, I picked Mighty Morphin Power Rangers The Fighting Edition. Now, if you grew up in the 90s, I can't imagine anyone who grew up in the 90s who didn't watch Power Rangers. And to me, Power Rangers was awesome. So anything Power Rangers related was also awesome. But by far, my favorite game at the time was the Fighting Edition because it was probably my favorite fighter at the time, besides Mortal Kombat, which I didn't really get to play until much later. Because obviously I won't be playing Mortal Kombat games as a 5-year-old. And it was certainly the game that me and my brother played a lot. I have so many fond memories of us trying to beat Tommy the Green Ranger, and we could never get past him. And it was just a very fun experience, and a very innocent time of my life, you know, before my life would be overwhelmed with problems. But as a fighting game, it was definitely fun for the time. I still have some chances to play it again on emulators, but yeah, that's why I would still say to this day it was probably number 9 for me. And going on into number 8, I picked Star Wars Rogue Squadron on the N64. Now, I'm not really the biggest Star Wars fan, but I could probably say I was a little bit more into it as a kid because, you know, I was fascinated by all the space and starfighters and X-Wings and the Force. I was really fascinated by it. And Rogue Squadron was definitely pretty cool. It was probably the first, like, flight simulator I had ever played. And I liked how you got to play, I believe, as Luke Skywalker, as he and his Rogue Squadron would kind of go on these special missions for the Rebels, taking on the Empire and going on these really epic battles and just playing all these different Starcrafts. And I think even to this day, I think there's a code that you could actually play as a Millennium Falcon, and I believe the code is Cowboy, which I find amazing that even after all these years of having not played it, I still remember that code, and I would type it in every single time to play as a Millennium Falcon. And it was just, I don't know, I just wish that game had been online. I think something like that would have really benefited from today's type of social gameplay style. But, you know, maybe that's like one of those few games I would love to see get remade. Going on to number 7 is a legendary game for the N64, and I picked Goldeneye. Goldeneye to this day still remains one of my all-time favorite shooters, and it's one of the very few games in gaming history that really revolutionized how game was going to be defined for the next generation, bringing in multiplayer. And I know that some people would like to say something like Doom was also revolutionary, and in my opinion it was, but I don't think it really pushed the boundaries as far as Goldeneye did. And, you know, although it did kind of vaguely follow the movie, which, you know, I thought was a pretty damn good movie, I just think that for what Goldeneye achieved for the time is just truly remarkable, and I think it still holds up to this day. I know that a lot of people, despite the fact that a lot of people were really excited when we heard that they were going to remake Goldeneye for, like, a last-gen systems, I think we can all agree that it wasn't nearly as good as the N64 experience, and I think that stays true to this very day, and that's why it's on this list. Going on into number 6 is my all-time favorite Final Fantasy game of all time, and that is Final Fantasy X, coming out in, I believe, 2001. Now, this was well into my experience with Final Fantasy, having started with Final Fantasy VII, And there were just so many great things about that game. The gameplay was great. The story was great. Everybody except Titus was a pretty interesting character. There was just so many great things about that game that I can't really understand why there's some Final Fantasy purists that really thought it was a terrible game. It really wasn't. And to this day, I can honestly say I have not played a decent Final Fantasy since 2001, which I'm hoping Final Fantasy 15 will be a great game, because that will be the last Final Fantasy game I played in the series when it all really was at its peak of Final Fantasy X, which is why it is number 6 on this list. And speaking about Final Fantasy, I also now have to add my most important Final Fantasy, and probably the most important video game I've ever played in my life, as number 5, and that is Final Fantasy VII. Final Fantasy VII was also another revolutionary game. It really made RPGs really get some serious attention, or JRPGs, and it was really one of the very few games that my brother actually introduced me to. And I gotta tell you, my experience with Final Fantasy is pretty crazy. I mean, aside the fact that that game took me 14 years to beat, and I was so fascinated by the game box, and I had all these fond memories of my brother kind of explaining me things about Sephiroth and Cloud and all these really cool things about materia and summonings. It was just such a fascinating experience, and it was the very game that really made me a story-driven gamer. I mean, it wasn't too complicated, but it was interesting to a point where, from that point on, every single game I played on from that point on would stay with me longer if it had a memorable and just emotional story. And I can't really say that a lot of games to this day would have had that effect on me if it wasn't for Final Fantasy VII, which is why it is, to this day, the most important video game I've ever played. But as a child, it only sent to number 5. Going on into number 4, I am picking my very, very first PlayStation 2 game I ever played, and that was Ratchet Clank. Ratchet Clank is, to this day, probably one of the best PlayStation exclusive franchises that have ever existed. I think the characters of Ratchet Clank as being really one of the best buddy-buddy, pairings I think has ever existed in gaming history. I think that the array of weapons, the gameplay, the story, the overall visual look is just absolutely stands apart from anything you will see in any other gaming genre or even gaming franchise in general. And I'm so happy that the movie will be coming out next year in 2015. I cannot wait to go see it. It is by far not only one of the best video games I've ever played on the PlayStation 2, but I'm sure the movie will be probably one of my most anticipated movies for 2015, and that is why it is number 4 on this list. Now we're getting real serious with the real kiddie games. And number 3 on this list, I think, is a game that I'm sure anyone who grew up in the 90s has to put on your list, and that is one of the Pokemon games. And for me, it was Pokemon Yellow. For those of you who don't know, for those of my younger viewers, you have to understand Pokemon was completely everywhere during the 90s, and every single kid was into it. It was everywhere. You had the cards, you had the games, you had the toys, you had the movies. It was everywhere. And Pokemon Yellow really stood out to me because it was the only game that you got to have Pikachu as your main Pokemon right from the beginning. It was your very first Pokemon, so you kind of got to experience the Ash story. And I have to admit that I actually did follow the Ash story in general. So I actually made sure to get Charmander, I got Bulbasaur, I got Squirtle, I got Caterpie, which I evolved to a Butterfree, and then when I got to a certain level I let it go, and then I got Pidgeotto. Pidgeotto, mind you, I didn't get Pidgey and then evolved to Pidgeotto, and then evolved to Pidgeot, and I let that Pokemon go. And I think by the end, when I got to the Pokemon League, I think the 6 Pokemon I had with me, it was Pikachu, which was, dang, my Pikachu was super charged up. I had Blastoise, I had Charizard, which, he was a bit of a problem with me early on. I had Venusaur, I had to get Articuno because I wanted an ice Pokemon, and I think I want to make sure I got Alakazam because I needed a psychic Pokemon, because once I got him, once I beat the Pokemon League, I then went up and I caught Mewtwo with my Master Ball, which you only got one of those. And here I am rambling about my Pokemon experience. By the way, just bottom line, Pokemon Yellow was awesome, still my favorite Pokemon game of all time, and to this day, probably one of the most cherished childhood video games I've ever played. Sorry about rambling. Going on to number 2 is Kingdom Hearts 1. Talk about living the dream. I mean, I can just explain this in one fashion. Kingdom Hearts was able to take Disney, Final Fantasy, 2 of my all-time favorite childhood loves, and put them into one game, and you've got heaven. And that's really all I need to say about it. I mean, the gameplay is awesome, the story was awesome, very emotional, very, very cool opening song. Was simple and clear. I think it's probably one of my all-time favorite video game songs of all time. And I just hope that Kingdom Hearts 3 can live up to the name, because I believe 2.5 Remix comes out in like 2 weeks, and I'll be sure to get that game and play the crap out of it and make sure to platinum that sucker, because Kingdom Hearts is awesome. And that takes me to number one. My number one favorite childhood video game of all time is also the number one of a lot of different categories. It is my number one favorite Nintendo game. It is my number one favorite Nintendo 64 game. It is my number one favorite Mario game, which I'm sure you can all tell what it is by now, and that is Super Mario 64. Was the number one favorite childhood game of all time. And on top of that, it was actually the first video game I ever played on the N64. I mean, I had dabbled in Super Nintendo, but it had been out a while by the time I kind of got into gaming for the first time around 5. But when 1996 came out, and Nintendo 64 came out, and Christmas was around the corner, that was the very first game I ever played, and to this day, it is one of the all-time greatest games I've ever played. I mean, who forgets grabbing Bowser by the tail for the first time, and just swinging him around? It's like, wow, this guy is strong, and then throwing his ass into a mine. I mean, this had some of the best boss fights, level design, music design, despite the fact it had a lack of story, which pretty much all you were going to do was save Princess Daisy. And it was just one of the all-time greatest platformers. I mean, heck, I enjoy playing Super Mario 64 probably more than any of the other Uncharted games. It just is such a cherished experience. And I think that any kid who grew up with Mario has to play this game at some point. I mean, if I ever have kids of my own, I will legitimately go out and buy an old school N64 to make sure my kids play Nintendo 64 and play Super Mario 64. That is how awesome Mario 64 was. That is how much you should appreciate it. This is how much you should love it. And that is why to this day it is number one, my all-time favorite childhood video game of all time. And with that is my list of my all-time favorite video games from childhood from 95 to 2002, and I would really like to know, what are some of your guys' favorite childhood video games? Please share your list with me down in the comments down below, and if you like this video, feel free to like, comment down below, and please subscribe to track me my future top 10 list videos. And like always, thank you guys for watching, and I'll see you next time.